So, guys, welcome back to the Kirk Miller Podcast. Today, I have a fantastic friend and a giant in the world of emotional well-being, and that is Richard D. Moat. Is that
Thank you.
correct?
Yes.
First of all, Rich, thank you so much for giving up your time today.
You're very welcome.
I know you've had to travel in from
Aylesbury,
Aylesbury.
Buckinghamshire. Yeah.
Yeah. But Rich, it's great to have you on here. I know we've spoken about this for a long time,
Mm.
and it's just an honor to have you on here. The reason I really wanted to get Richard on today's podcast, I believe the subject of emotional well-being and just emotions in general are fundamental to people living happier. And if you're a business owner listening to this, performing better in business, if you have aspirations of being healthy and in shape and things like that, I think it all starts with emotions. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to you by a very great friend, Gary Rhodes, who I've also had on the podcast. We both agree he's a million miles an hour, isn't he? But one thing
Mm.
Gary's very good at is connecting great people. And so, Gary, if you listen to this, thank you so much for the connection with Richard. And I think when we first connected, I'm sure it was in London on maybe a rooftop.
Somewhere in Soho, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Gary saying to me, because he knows how passionate I am about personal development, state management, just basically anything and anyone that can help someone live happier, perform better, squeeze the life out of who someone's trying to become as a person. Gary's fully aware of how obsessive I am in that area. So when he said to me, Kirk, you have to meet this guy. I mean, he's come across many people in the personal development world. As you know, he's been on stage with the likes of Tony Robbins and giants in that space. So when Gary said to me, Kirk, you have to listen to this guy. And I think he might have even forwarded me a voice note, Richard, where I think he'd asked you a question about something with emotional well-being, and you sent him a voice note back, and he said, Kirk, just with your blessing, of course, he sent
Mm.
this to me, and I was like, mind my language, fucking hell, I can't wait to meet this guy. So, Rich, it's an absolute honor to have you here. And look, for anyone listening, if you are someone who is struggling in any way or feels that they could be emotionally more consistent or just would love a new level of awareness of around emotions and mindset and things like that, then you're in for a treat today. And I will unapologetically, Richard, squeeze the life out of every minute we have today. I do have some questions and stuff like that, but um, I want this to flow organically, Rich, because me and you don't struggle to talk. And
Mm.
yeah. So, Rich, I've got to kick off just before we unpack a little bit about your backstory and what drives you in emotional, what drove you to um, master this area technically. For the people listening, emotional well-being or just emotional talk in general, I believe can sometimes appear quite complicated, and there's so many different abstracts of that or people's opinions and meanings. What is emotional well-being for someone whose area of specialist isn't emotional well-being? What is emotional well-being for people listening?
I reckon the best way to describe it or to start off with the idea, because it's a very broad idea,
Yeah.
I think anything that has the words well being after it is broad by definition.
Mhm.
Um, so I would suggest that the place to start would be the relationship that we have with our emotions.
Mm.
So, whether they're emotions that we're happy to feel or we'd rather not feel, our relationship with those emotions determines what our emotional frequency is. So, in relating to feeling angry today or sad about something that happened in the past, effectively what I'm doing is I'm carrying with me anger, which is pretty acidic, sadness, which is pretty heavy. And in our culture today, in most cultures today, we want to run a mile from these feelings. We don't like them. Why would we? There's not a lot to like about them. So, what we tend to do is we tend to develop an adversarial relationship with those emotions that we don't like or don't want to feel. And if at all possible, we will seek out those emotions that do make us feel good, that we're happy to feel. It's this principle of pain and pleasure. So, to start off with, emotional well being for me is about understanding which emotions do I have an adversarial relationship with? Which do I want to run a mile from? Which do I want to avoid? Which do I want to suppress as soon as they come up? And turn it into a more of an amicable relationship with those emotions because they're very real. Whether they're positive or negative, let's say, whether we want to experience them or not, they're really very real. They're true. They're an honest reflection of how someone or something is affecting us. In trying to avoid them or deny them or suppress them or sidestep them, it's a bit like saying, I don't want to go near anything that's true. I mean, who wants to feel angry, sad, afraid, hurt, ashamed, guilt? None of us want that, and yet so many of us will experience it. But if we have an adversarial relationship with those particular emotions that we don't want, one, we're going to keep running from them. But two, what happens, and this is perhaps the most sinister bit, is we'll bury them alive when we feel them. So we won't fully feel them, but as soon as they're on our radar, we'll do whatever we possibly can to bury them alive. And emotions that get buried alive never die. And at some point, they will represent themselves either in physical form
Mm.
or in mental form. They'll always be there energetically because that's what emotions are. They're a form of energy. So the more we are carrying around with us unwanted, unhealthy emotions, then that is going to negatively impact our emotional well being. And it's not as simple as substituting positive for negative.
Mhm.
Because when we feel negative emotions, but we don't fully honor or express or engage with them, because they get buried alive, they then start to exist within our cellular makeup, which then means that we carry them around with us until we deal with them in the most appropriate way.
Mm.
So, the degree to which we are emotionally well is determined by how much we're still carrying around that's toxic or acidic or unhealthy emotionally, and how much we are engaging with those emotions so that we don't carry them around.
Mm.
Because what we've done over time, all of us without exception, is we've created what I refer to as an emotional back catalogue. All those emotions that we have failed or refused to feel over time, we've buried them alive. We've created a back catalogue of unexpressed emotions. And every morning, all of us wake up still carrying the energy and the frequency of whatever those emotions are. It doesn't really matter where they've come from. It doesn't really matter what the events might have been that might have triggered those emotions, because the energy of the emotion exists within our physiology. And you know better than anyone that if we're going to have optimal physical health and a physiology that we're happy with and proud of and that's going to serve us and last us into the future, we can't afford to be carrying around anything that's toxic or damaging or a potential saboteur
Mm.
to our physiology. So that's a long winded answer to the question. Emotional well being, I would start with that. It's what we're still carrying from the past will get in the way of us being emotionally well in the future. So if we can clear up what's in this back catalogue, if you like,
Mhm.
sort that out and resolve that in the most appropriate ways, and then make sure that moving forward we don't reproduce the same habits of burying and suppressing and denying and avoiding, but we engage with and we honor and we deal with those unwanted emotions when they come up in the moment, we're never going to recreate a back catalog.
Mm.
So we're never going to be dragging around with us more unexpressed, unwanted, emotions because our relationship with them has changed to, okay, today I'm feeling this. I'm not happy that I'm feeling it, but you know what? I want to work through it. I want to get to a point where I have done as much, let's call it processing of that emotion as I can
Mm,
so that I don't consign it to this back catalogue,
mm.
so that I don't then wake up tomorrow morning with its energy still part of my cellular makeup. So let's start there.
Where does the back catalogue come from?
Um, Two places primarily. So during our lifetime, once we've arrived here,
Mhm.
our circumstances, our environment, our role models, our experiences will alert us to the various different types of emotions that there are. So the back catalogue comes from those times, those experiences when we fail for whatever reason to adequately feel and process and honor whatever those feelings are. Now, when we're babies, we're probably the best we're ever going to be at expressing ourselves.
Why?
Well, we haven't learned that there might be danger in either feeling those emotions or expressing those emotions. We haven't learned that yet.
Mm.
Unfortunately, for some of us, we do learn that quite early on in childhood. However, let's go with this. When we're babies, we have no frame of reference for whether it's good or bad, right or wrong to express ourselves. So, what do? We just express ourselves.
Mhm.
It's pure, it's beautiful in that regard, and it's the most natural thing in the
It's
world.
without fear.
Well, yes, because we haven't learned that there are any adverse consequences to doing it until the first time we experience something that's painful in relation to expressing ourselves. And then our brain goes, hang on a second. Okay, so you know when you did that, that pain happened. Do you want to experience that pain again? I don't think so. Okay, so that,
Mm.
be careful. And this can happen very, very quickly over a short period of time, or it can just evolve over time as we grow up. Effectively, what we witness, and this is moving on to the second part of where the back catalog comes from, when we witness other people in our environment, either expressing themselves emotionally or suppressing themselves emotionally, and the consequences of that, we then can decide whether or not it's safe to behave in that way.
Mm.
And then the third, and I think the most underrated, misunderstood contribution to the back catalog
Mhm.
is what we inherit. We actually inherit the emotional wounds, the unresolved traumas of previous generations.
Where does that come from?
Well,
It
obviously, when two people get together and they co create
Yeah.
children,
Mhm.
with the greatest respect to everyone who's ever got together and created children,
Yeah.
the chances are very good that the two parents are both emotionally wounded to a greater or lesser degree from their own lives. So let's put someone who's emotionally wounded together with someone else who's emotionally wounded, and let's get these two emotionally wounded people to co create someone new. The way that it works is that whatever each party brings to the table, it is unavoidable that some of that, whatever that is, not just bad stuff, but whatever is brought to the table, has to be passed on. Now, I don't believe anyone's ever going to measure what was passed on exactly.
Mhm.
I think it's very, very difficult, almost impossible to do that anyway. I think it's more important that people understand, if nothing else, just open yourself up to the possibility that, look, whatever challenges you have early on in life or later in life, the seeds for those challenges didn't start with you. They were there and they were passed on, a bit like a baton in a relay race. And, parents, grandparents, great grandparents, I don't believe that they pass this stuff on deliberately. I think if they knew what they had the potential to pass on down the generations, I think more people would have more therapy if they really bought into it and understood it. And there's plenty of good work out there that confirms that we arrive here with a degree of inherited trauma, emotional wounds from previous generations. And the reality is, we can't do anything about what's gone. We can't turn back time, of course. So if we arrive here with emotional wounds, emotional scars, unresolved traumas that have been handed down, the good news is that in the here and now, when we know how and what to do, we can actually heal whatever it is we came here with. Because as long as we don't work on healing whatever we came here with, guess what we came here with is going to do? It's going to present itself again.
Mm.
So then the question arises, do you want this to continue? If you were going to become a parent, would you want this to continue?
Mm.
I think it's a safe bet that most people would say no.
Mm.
And that's the good news, because just because something has been inherited, it doesn't mean it's forever.
Mm.
It means it's present, it's real. We could talk about it all day long. We could debate it if you want. You don't have to believe that it has been inherited.
Mm.
What's the reality of your life right now?
Mm.
If you're struggling with something that's fundamental, that you're having difficulty getting over, whether you learned it from a next door neighbor, mum, or whether you inherited it from up to 7 generations ago, not that relevant,
Mm.
because you today have this issue.
Mm.
And if this issue is spoiling your life, would you want to do something about it? Now, some people will, absolutely.
Mm.
Some people won't. And some people would like to know more, please. So there's some, as I say, there's some great texts out there that explain much better and go into much more detail than I have here about how we inherit what's gone on in the past. My work with people is to understand, okay, what are you dealing with presently? What is troubling you? What are you struggling with?
Mm.
If you want, I can let you know where that came from, a previous generation. It won't change anything. If you like, you could look at mum and dad and say, oh, yeah, mum's like that. It's her fault. Well, all right. If you want to play the blame game, go ahead, but it won't change anything.
Yeah.
But if you'd like to resolve this, it is possible to resolve this. And what would your life be like without it, depending on what it is?
Yeah.
And so then sort of the baton is handed to you in this example. Now that you know, you can't claim ignorance anymore.
Mm.
Now that you know you've got something to work on
Mm.
that might have come from a previous generation, okay, what do you want to do with it?
Mm.
And that's taking responsibility for something that wasn't ours in the first place, that didn't start with us, but not playing the blame game or playing the victim, because nothing is going to be solved. Nothing is going to be achieved by doing that. By all means, have a rant, but if you understand that it's with you now,
Mm.
then really, yeah, the invitation is up to you,
Mm.
type of thing. But this is a big concept for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make it any less true or accurate. It's just rather new for a lot of people.
Mm.
I mean, crikey, the subject of emotional well-being is quite new for a lot of people.
Why? Why do you think that is? Because it's something. I mean, now it's obviously a lot more out there.
Mm.
And knowing that your emotional state drives all your decisions. Why wasn't it? Why wasn't emotional well-being a thing? Maybe I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Well, I think that the whole, no, I don't think, I'll reverse that. The subject of emotions
Mm.
is a difficult one for people to understand because they're so subjective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of it. I also think that because it's so important and it's so key, if more people understood it and if more people spent more time and energy investing in their emotional health,
Mm,
people would become happier, they'd become healthier,
mm,
they'd become more liberated,
mm,
they'd feel more in control of their lives.
mm,
Because if we look at the pattern on the planet generally as a whole, and certainly in the UK of late, there's an absence of a sense of agency over their lives, control, certainty. There's so much more doubt, uncertainty, fear. And these are emotions that weigh heavily, that really affect us. They affect our performance in every area of life, and they affect our thinking, and they affect our physical health as well.
mm,
So it does seem a little ironic that, and this is just my opinion, of course, all of this is my opinion with a few facts thrown in, but the reality is that I believe that our emotional health is the cornerstone that determines the quality of our physical, mental, and social well being. And yet, it is the one thing that perhaps has come last in that list of four, because we've had people tell us for years and years and years about how to improve your physical health, right?
mhm.
You know this better than anyone.
Yeah.
So, what are we supposed to do for our physical health? Well, amongst other things, we're supposed to exercise and we're supposed to eat healthily. Well, those two things are good pieces of advice,
Mm.
but it's incomplete because if you're unhappy, if you're stressed,
Guess what
if
you
you're afraid,
guess what you do?
if you're angry, that makes it harder to exercise and harder to eat the right food in the first
Yeah.
place, but it has an impact on the chemical makeup of our bodies.
Mm,
So, consequently, we can do the best work in the gym, we can eat the best possible nutrition, and yet we still don't have the health we want. And people experience this. I regularly exercise, I'm eating all the right things, and yet I'm still unwell. So, what's the explanation for that? It's your mental health. It's how you're thinking. It's your mood. It's whether you're positive or negative in your outlook. Oh, is that what it is? Okay, great. So, what I'll do is I'll make sure I exercise, I'll eat all the right things, and I'll think positively. But that still isn't catching everyone's health because there are still more, well, say still, more than any other time in history, more people are walking around carrying unresolved illnesses, ailments, and diseases that don't have explanations as to why someone is that unwell. Even if you do exercise and eat everything that's right and have a healthy mindset,
mm,
that's clearly not enough. Because if that was enough, I think we'd have a much healthier nation, a much healthier planet. So, what's missing then? And this is where the emotional aspect comes into it. And if you were to study medicine and go back to the beginning of medicine, the history of medicine, this fella called Hippocrates, who came up with a lot of wise words, some of which I have to say I don't agree with, but who am I? Anyway, he's quoted a lot as the father of modern medicine.
mhm.
And one of the things that he said that I really like, so I'm going to buy into it, is that it's much more important to know what type of person has an illness than what type of illness the person has.
Oi.
Well, he believed that it's more important to know what the constitution of an individual is,
Mm,
because that will be a greater determinant of how healthy or unhealthy they are. Because, with respect to the medical community, diseases, ailments, illnesses, they're labels for a set of presenting symptoms. Okay, so I've got this label for these symptoms. Let me make one up. Irritable bowel syndrome. I have great difficulty controlling what goes on in my bowel. Okay, so there's the facts.
mhm.
All right. So why? Where's this come from? How come you're experiencing IBS? That's typically the question that doesn't get asked these days. What's the cause of this? Or if it does get asked, then the constitution of the person experiencing the IBS is not taken into consideration. It's more a case of whatever the medical community have decided is the cause of that. Could be this, could be that, could be the other. Change your diet, make sure you go to bed earlier, and this is appearing more and more now these days, reduce stress.
Mm.
That has appeared more in the last 10 years in any explanations for any physical ailments than anything else.
I agree, but it's quite a generic statement, isn't it? Reduce stress.
Massively.
Just imagine me just saying that to a client um, who's struggling anyway. Because there's so many people listening to this, I guarantee are
Mm,
stressed on a week to week
mm.
basis. Like you said, I don't believe there's ever been more awareness around stress. But just telling someone, don't be stressed, reduce stress.
Well, it's lousy advice.
Yes.
Well, actually, no, I'm going to change that if I may. It's great advice, but where's the how?
Mm,
There's no how with that, is there? Reduce stress. So unless it's followed up with, and here's how,
mm,
then it is just a platitude, unfortunately. And here's the next challenge with this whole idea of it's stress. Stress comes in many, many different forms.
mm,
Biggest form of stress,
mhm,
unhealed emotional wounds and unresolved traumas, because the emotional impact of the conflicts and the traumas in our lives, those that we've had since we've been here, and any that we inherited, by the way, yes, they place a huge stress on all of the systems of the body. Because carrying around toxic, acidic, unhelpful, unhealthy emotions internally will absolutely affect the equilibrium. Okay, the body has the capacity to keep searching and seeking homeostasis,
mhm,
which it will do if at all possible, because we know how clever it is. But if it's achieving homeostasis under the weight of and under the specter of unexpressed, unresolved anger, sadness, fear, guilt, hurt, shame,
mm,
then it's not going to be able to perform optimally, because some of the resources that it needs to perform optimally are actually being taken up by keeping at bay the consequences of the anger, sadness, fear, guilt, hurt, shame.
mm,
And so we go. So, yes, I mean, stress is one of the biggest subjects we could talk about.
mm,
And I think also, as it happens, that a lot of people have got the wrong idea about what stress is,
mm,
for what it's worth.
mm.
But I'll just throw that in and leave that there.
Where does your passion and obsession, I don't know if it's the right word or the wrong word, Rich, because I know you've been studying this for how long now? Am I right in saying like 2 or 3 decades or more?
Well, emotional well-being for 30 years,
30 years.
but before that, it was more performance
Yeah.
and physical well-being.
But where did what was the why behind that?
What the emotional
Yeah.
well-being,
Yeah. What?
um, the the trigger point for me, or the turning point rather for me, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and up until the point when he was diagnosed, I had spent my adult life as a sportsman and also working in business. I rubbed shoulders with a lot of elite sports people, and we would talk about mindset. How do you do what you do? What is it that makes you a success? And I took that into business, and it really worked. My dad contracted cancer, and I thought, I want to be able to help him. So I thought, positive mental attitude, mindset. I don't know that that's going to be that helpful. So I decided to start studying all the different approaches to health and well-being from around the world, um, to see if I could learn anything that would allow me to in any way help my dad. And so I I didn't start off with Western medicine. There was something about Western medicine that just made me feel really uncomfortable. And I think the thing where that started was whenever we used to go to the doctors when I was younger, and I used to walk into the surgery with my mum, it was clear that she was uncomfortable, or she couldn't be herself, or she felt out of sorts in the presence of the doctor. And back in those days, what the doctor said, you took it as gospel.
Mm.
You never questioned it, you never challenged it. That it was almost law, if you like. So I never got a positive experience when I went to see the doctor with my mum. So that would be my explanation as to why I didn't jump headfirst into medicine. But I looked at all the other different philosophies around the world of how they approached health, but more importantly, how they approached treating illness. And there was a common denominator in every different model that I looked at. And that was this subject of stress and how we handle the emotions that come from life events. Because once an event has happened, we can't undo the event. You see, the event is not the problem. The emotional impact of the event is the problem because the emotional impact gets imprinted in our cellular makeup. So this kept being a recurring theme with all of these different models of health and well-being that I was studying. I thought, this is really very interesting. I hadn't come across this before. So stress and emotions. Wow. So then I came round to Western medicine. And I mean, that's a job in itself to study that. And
Mhm.
I wasn't that keen on studying to that degree. So I just started reading the history of medicine. So in the first couple of weeks of studying the history of medicine, came across this fellow by the name of Hippocrates. And he had this quote: it's much better to understand what type of person has the illness than what type of illness the person has. And I thought, okay, I don't need any more convincing now. The constitution, the emotional makeup of an individual, their challenges, their conflicts, their dramas, their traumas that they haven't successfully and effectively resolved do very, very clearly play a part in the onset of illness and disease. So then I started studying with and seeking out everybody I could who had spent time researching the link between physical health and
Mhm.
illness and emotions.
What did you find?
Well, I came across um, so many books on the subject that kept saying the same thing. There weren't many people who were, if you like, flying the flag for it or who were outspoken about it. But there were some people who still were sharing their discoveries. And a lot of the people who were sharing their discoveries, who were previously part of the medical profession, had been ostracized from the medical profession because of what they'd shared. They'd done some hard to challenge research that seemed to prove absolutely there is a direct link.
Mm.
Now, I know that when something emerges and it attracts attention, then it's either because it is very, very wrong, in which case it
Mhm.
needs putting to bed type of thing,
Mhm.
or there's something in it.
Mhm.
So if there's something in it, perhaps we should study it more to find out what we can learn from it
Mhm.
in case it is what it claims. Because a lot of the people that I studied had done work that showed when you heal the emotional component of something, the physical component can change. It can be reversed, it can be reduced, it can be remedied. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is an interesting concept because I'd never come across this before. The idea that physical illness was linked to emotional disharmony, let's say. So I sought out every single person who I could find, whether it was on the internet, whether it was their books, whether I sought out to be mentored by them to learn as
Yeah.
much as I possibly could. Unfortunately, my father had passed away by this time. But ironically, and I suppose poetically, and this is how I look at it, if he hadn't become unwell, there wouldn't have been the opportunity for me to discover what I've discovered
Mm.
and to go on to be able to create my philosophy of just how important our emotional well-being is,
Mm.
and how optimal emotional well-being is a cornerstone for both physical and mental and social well-being as well.
Mm.
So it was my father's cancer diagnosis that got me onto the subject.
Mhm.
I was unable to do anything for him, sadly, but the blessing, if you like, was that it put me on this path that's allowed me for the last 30 years now
Mm.
to be able to understand that one of the most important things we can do for our lives, for our families, for our health is to attend to our emotional well being, our emotional landscape, if you like. And in doing that, and this is borne out by, I suppose, the results that I've had over the years,
Mhm.
whether it's with myself, whether it's with clients, whether it's with students, it does seem to be a really significant thing to consider.
Mm.
And and you've seen this as well, for so many years now, people have been focusing on physical health, nutrition, lifestyle, environment, mindset, but haven't really focused on the emotional aspect of things.
Mhm.
And we're not getting any healthier.
Mm.
People are not happier. There's a real degeneration I've noticed in people's overall well being. And my opinion is that a large part of that is down to the relationship that we have with our emotions.
Mhm.
Improve that, understand what we're still carrying from the past, work with or buy the books or go to the seminars that have the depth and the wisdom and the integrity to present information in a way that will allow you to go, do you know what? That makes so much sense.
Mm.
And this is something that happens a lot whenever I talk to groups. People will say to me afterwards, I suspected there was something in it, but never really understood exactly. But what you said, it makes so much sense. And for me, that's one of the most important barriers to overcome for people. Because if we haven't internalized it or found space for the belief or just the principle to exist, we're likely to block it as an option. We're likely to discriminate against it as a possibility, but out of ignorance rather than anything else.
Mm.
So I think one of the most important things that we can ever do is, if there's something worth knowing about, find out about it, become educated in it, see if it works for you, see if it applies to you.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're assuming here that health's important.
Mm.
So if your health's important to you and you want to be proactive
Mm.
about creating optimal health, take a look at emotional health. Yes, by all means, mental health, physical health, nutritional health,
Mhm.
your lifestyle, your genetics, your environment. Yes, don't discount any of them.
Mhm.
Add in this emotional aspect to who you are, because I'm absolutely convinced that it's the most important bit.
Mm.
Not the only bit, it's the most
Why?
important
Why
bit.
do you think it's the most important bit?
Well, if I look at, like I said a bit earlier, if I look at typically the results that people are getting
Mhm.
when they introduce lifestyle changes, they exercise more, which would be a lifestyle change perhaps, they look at their nutrition, they change things about their environment,
Yeah.
then it's hard not to get an uplift in your health.
Mhm.
Now, that for a lot of people is enough, but people are still unwell. They're still unhealthy. They're still not as at peace, as it were. They're not as at ease, as it were.
Mm.
They're carrying around perhaps greater sense of fear or uncertainty or doubt or anxiety.
Mm.
If we look at the increase
Mm.
in suicides, depression, anxiety, well, with the greatest of respect, I don't believe that physical activity, nutritional activity, changing your environment, and changing your lifestyle is always going to be enough. It'll work for some people.
No, I agree, Richard. I mean, it's funny. The reason I asked that and probed is Because obviously the things you're just mentioning is exactly what we're doing, built to last, improve training and lifestyle and environment, etc., etc. But one common pattern we've noticed that these habits, this new way of living, thinking, doing, choosing, doesn't stick if someone hasn't got control of their emotions and have emotional consistency. I've said many, many times before, Rich, I like to pride myself on being very physically consistent. Have I always been perfect? Absolutely not with my emotions. I don't think anyone is. But you cannot, certainly with ease, you certainly can't be physically consistent with these new behaviors if you're not emotionally consistent, because I believe state drives decision making. So a lot of people, and I know there'll be people listening to this, maybe even clients, a lot of people are trying to shift their identity long term with how they see themselves. And really, say, for example, if health is a certain uh, a healthy body in great shape is an aspiration of a certain person, they're never going to do that until they truly consistently become that person, how they see themselves, how they live. And what we've noticed, when we've done audits of clients, the clients that can stay in shape and tend to be happier are more emotionally proactive rather than reactive. And they don't have these
Mm.
massive fluctuations. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Richard. For the people who are struggling maybe to sustain these new habits and these new way of thinking, how much of that potentially is unresolved emotions that are resurfacing and causing self-sabotage potentially in these people?
About 99% of it.
Mm,
Because what you're talking about there, without actually using these words, it's how people feel about themselves.
mm,
The self worth, self image,
mm.
self concept. How we feel about ourselves determines how we behave more than what we think about ourselves.
What's the difference between feel and think?
Well,
Or
feeling,
emotions and thoughts? Maybe it's the same question potentially.
okay, so feelings, emotions, they are visceral experiences that we have, they are energetic. So, for example, the origin of the word emotion is energy in motion. So, whenever we feel an emotion, what is actually happening internally is there is a movement of energy within us. So, that's an emotion. When we have thoughts, well, thoughts are abstract, they're made up in our mind. We can be reminded of something, so we don't necessarily have a thought, but we're reminded by a smell or a piece of music. A thought comes to us, bang, out of the blue. So the makeup, I suppose, of an emotion and a thought is very, very different. Now, the reason why a lot of people think that they're the same thing is because a lot of thoughts have an emotion attached to them. So you have a thought about something that happened in the past. If it was a positive experience and you rethink back to that experience, bingo, accompanying the thought is the emotion that went with it at the time.
And that,
Hurrah.
yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
So you can once again feel what you felt back then thanks to that thought. Nice one. Unfortunately, the same also applies when we either think about something from the past that wasn't particularly pleasant, or we're reminded about something from the past that wasn't particularly pleasant. And let's take a piece of music or the smell of the perfume or the aftershave. Have you ever been thrown back to the past and started to feel something courtesy of a smell or a record that reminds you of something
Or
painful?
maybe someone says something to you, which is an emotional trigger that brings back something
Perfect.
that someone has said to you
Yeah.
that caused you to destruct or react in a certain way back in
Yeah.
childhood.
So that is an example when we are triggered
Yeah.
emotionally
Hmm.
by either a smell or a sound or something somebody says or just a picture of something.
Hmm.
When we're triggered emotionally, we are reconnected to the emotional charge that was set at the time. Now, if I got you to think about something from the past that was particularly unpleasant for you, and you had that thought now, if you hadn't resolved the emotional impact of that event, the emotion or emotions that applied at the time will come with a thought. So immediately in this moment, because I asked you to think about that, you start feeling that. Now, you don't want to feel this, right? So what your brain does is it goes, okay, if you think about that thing that happened back there, this is how you'll feel. So, got two options. Don't think about this thing and then you won't feel that thing. Or let's reframe this thing in the hope that you feel differently. So you might be able to reframe the thing that happened here and now, but you know this emotion that came with it at the time that was set off at the time? That's still alive. It's just not obvious because what you've done is you've distracted yourself from the feeling by coming up with this thing called a reframe. Now, if the reality is, and this comes back to the question you asked earlier, or the answer rather, about the relationship with our emotions, if you can, we'll make this about you because obviously
Yeah.
we're here, but
Yeah.
this applies to
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
exception. If you were to have a thought about something from the past, whether it was this morning, yesterday, 10 years ago, 40 years, doesn't matter, and it comes with a particularly unpleasant or unwanted set of emotions, then you haven't got over that event.
Otherwise, it wouldn't affect you.
Exactly right. Because if there was no emotional impact whatsoever when you had this thought about the thing that happened in the past that back then wasn't good at all, if you have that thought today and you are not moved emotionally at all, or more importantly, you're not moved adversely,
Mm.
it's not a problem. The memory is not a problem because there's no emotion attached to it. But you see, what most people have done, all of us have done to a greater or lesser degree, is we've had these experiences in the past.
Hmm.
We've moved on from the experience because the experience has happened. It's history. But what has come with that is the emotional charge that we experienced at the time that hasn't been resolved. So, where does the emotional charge get buried? Somewhere in our physiology. And on the basis that emotions represent energy in motion,
Mm.
the majority of us, and this is the back catalog idea, are carrying around with us energy that we haven't fully processed, that we haven't worked through from stuff that happened in the past.
And what are the signs that you've noticed in clients you've worked with, or just in general, of signs or ways that people pat down, pat that down? What do they do to mask it? Or
Crikey. There's
I mean, I'm sure there's so many things. I know the obvious one is people move the problem or they do something to distract themselves. But what are the most common things you've seen, say, in, I don't know, high performers or business owners listening to this, even some of the most successful?
okay. Well, I'd introduce the idea of self medication. And self medication um, is ways in which we can stop feeling what we don't want to feel. So let's take a very, very common example. If alcohol or drugs, for example, make me feel something that I'd like to feel,
Hmm.
they become very important. If they stop me from feeling something I don't want to feel, they're still very, very important. So throughout life, what we learn are ways to make sure we either don't feel what we don't want to feel,
Hmm.
or we feel something we'd rather feel because we don't like what we're feeling on a regular basis.
Hmm.
And there are a gazillion and one ways that we can self medicate. Anything that stops us from feeling what we don't want to feel is a dangerous behavior, even though it's supremely intelligent.
Hmm.
Because if I'm feeling something on a regular basis that I don't want to feel, and I find Haagen Dazs ice cream, And I find that when I have Haagen-Dazs ice cream, I stop feeling those feelings that I'm feeling on a regular basis. Haagen-Dazs becomes very important to me. That's how I self-medicate because of how that makes me feel when I'm eating it, because it stops me from feeling what I have been feeling for the past however many days, however many weeks, however many years. At the same time, if it brings me a sense of joy, well, that's a double whammy. It becomes doubly important because not only does it stop me, but it actually gives me feelings that I like.
Mm.
Hurrah. This could be Haagen-Dazs, this could be anything,
Anything, yeah, that you can't control yourself with, and you repeat on a consistent
anything.
basis,
You know, we
and you
can,
probably feel guilty afterwards.
well, a lot of people who are used to feeling guilty,
Mhm.
they'll feel guilty again. Yes. If you're used to feeling guilty, you see, the patterns that we run, the emotional patterns that we run are exactly that. They're themes that happen over time. They build up over time. They repeat over time. So we all have tendencies
Mm.
to feel certain things. And the reason that we have those tendencies to feel whatever we feel is because we probably arrived here with someone else's unresolved, let's make it guilt.
Mhm.
So we're ready to feel guilty. We're already carrying the feeling of guilt.
Mm.
We come into an environment where we become aware of guilt because guilt's a thing in the family. Ah, okay. So we don't necessarily work out that it's called guilt, but we recognize it. It affects us internally. So then we become predisposed to feel guilty, unconscious, second nature. And then we just got to think about how many other feelings.
And how much of this shapes someone's identity over time?
I would say, almost all of it. And when you talk about identity, you see, every one of our behaviors is driven by a need for something. We have a set, we all have the same set of unconscious needs. I know you know about unconscious needs.
Mm.
The needs drive us. The satisfying of those needs is what drives us. Now, if we are trying to meet these needs, but we're wrestling with a history or a back catalogue of anger, sadness, fear, guilt, hurt, shame, whatever it might
Mhm.
be, this is a distraction. This makes it difficult. These unresolved, unwanted, toxic, acidic emotions makes it very difficult for us to feel good about who we are.
Mm.
Because when we feel good about who we are, we're more likely to make decisions that are healthy, that are good for us,
Mm.
that are morally acceptable, even.
Mm.
But depending on what we've been exposed to, and this is where the first 7 years becomes very important in our lives, it's called the imprint period.
Yeah, explain more about that for the listeners. Like, what's that mean?
Well, the first 7 years of our lives, are, it's the period when our brain is fully formed, fully shaped, fully programmed. Some schools of thought believe it's only 3 years, some five. I'm going to stick with seven because there's a real significance to the figure seven and a 7 year cycle in our lives.
Mhm.
We can perhaps come to that some other time. But imagine, if you will, that the first 7 years were like sponges. Everything we are exposed to, we are open to, and we absorb until or unless we realize it is in some way a threat or in some way painful.
Not part of the script.
Well, you talk about
Yeah.
scripts. We are going to live whatever the script was for the previous generations until or unless we do something about it.
Mhm.
But before the age of seven, we've got no independence, we've got no choices, we've got no freedom, we don't have the intelligence to be able to make these types of choices anyway. So by the time we get to seven, everything that we've been exposed to, plus anything that we've inherited, if you're okay with the idea of inheriting stuff, that then shapes the trajectory and our future lives based upon whatever's gone into that first 7 years. And this is why having role models as parents, or parents who are role models, is so important. Because if we're learning so much, or it's what we learn in the first 7 years is so significant, we need to make sure that we're learning the stuff that will be good for us moving forward. But what if mum or dad, so wounded as they are themselves from their own experiences, aren't able to be the role models that would be ideal? Well, it's not their fault. And it can explain why perhaps our life goes in a similar direction to mum or dad. It's simply because what we've been exposed to, and mum and dad co-creating us in the first place, has put in place the programming,
Mm.
mental and emotional programming,
Mhm.
for our future. So, if we're exposed to an angry household, if we're exposed to boundaries not being enforced or communicated, if we're exposed to excessive worry, if we're exposed to parents who demonstrate behaviors that would fall under the heading of self medicating, whatever that might be, we can't avoid that exposure. It's not possible. So the question then becomes, how soon are we going to start manifesting and reproducing the patterns that we've learned and the patterns that we've inherited? Because we will. Until or unless there's some outside character or force or scenario in our lives that, if you like, spoils the continuation of the programming. Good example, if a young child, for example, goes to boarding school and they're away from their parents for an extended period of time, or they're away from siblings from an extended period of time, and they're in a different environment where rules and regulations perhaps are different. In some cases, it can be same sex stuff, different group of peers. You become more independent when you're at boarding school than if you were coming home every day. So you can see how various different, or this is an example of how one particular event when we're younger can help shape and change the trajectory of our lives, because it's all about who we are influenced by. And then perhaps the biggest influencer of all of the influences, I would say, whether we're young or old,
Mhm.
is fear.
Why?
Well, it moves us to do things that ultimately will ensure our survival. If we feel threatened at all by anything, then the fight or flight response, I mean, look, this response is built in to who we are. You don't buy it somewhere. You don't acquire it at the age of 3.5. No, it's built in. So we have this natural ability. And I think there's something in this, the fact that it comes as part of the blueprint of who we are.
Mm.
We have this natural ability to either run away to survive or to stay and fight to survive.
Mm.
So we are predisposed to survive. And consequently, what happens in life, we get the opportunity to exercise the fight or flight response quite a lot, depending on our experiences when we're younger.
Mm.
So we learn to become either courageous or afraid very early on, depending on the environment in which we're brought up. And this is why environment is so important,
Mm.
because everything around us contributes to, do we feel safe or not?
Mm.
And if we feel safe, we're more relaxed, we're more at ease. If we know that there's no punishment for expressing how you're feeling, for example, well, you're more likely to express how you feel because there's no adverse consequences. If your parents encourage you to talk about how your day at school was and to share anything that was upsetting, and you knew it was safe and they validated you when you did it, you would learn, good idea, safe, healthy, and approved of for me to express my emotions.
Mm.
Great, good start. That's not the norm, however. What tends to happen, and again, this is not about blaming anybody for any of this, it's more about understanding. If a parent gives us any indication at all that maybe us expressing ourselves is not a good idea, we will very, very quickly learn or we'll very quickly process. Okay, so they're telling me to be quiet. Dad's got a frown on his face. Mum's walked out of the room. Okay. Does that mean they don't love me? Does that mean they won't validate me? Does that mean they'll disapprove of me? Will they disconnect from me? Will they punish me? Do I want any of these? No, I don't want any of these things to happen. Okay. In that case, then learn to keep your feelings to yourself. Got it? Got it.
So you're suppressing your emotions.
Because we believe that in expressing them will incur the disapproval of two of the two most important people in our lives. Don't want to take that risk. And approval, validation, connection, love, significance are five of these unconscious needs. So the prospect of these five needs not being satisfied by me simply crying in the presence of mum and dad, oh, no, no. Consequences far too great. I'll just learn not to cry in front of mum and dad. Done.
Which then affects you as you're going up when you're in.
Well,
So
you've learned to
yeah.
suppress your, certainly in front of mum and dad,
Mhm.
but you've learned to suppress. Oh, no. You've learned to suppress at an early age. What will happen in the future? But if you're carrying with you a belief that you will be disapproved of, invalidated, disconnected, unloved, and lose your significance if you do express your emotions, you're not going to rush to do it.
Then am I right in saying that that could make you think at different stages of life and different situations that you're not enough?
Well, it can do. Effectively, what happens in those situations is you don't allow yourself to be yourself.
Mm.
So if you're feeling something and you don't express it, but you keep it in and you don't share it, you are suppressing a part of who you are. So that part of who you are, that expressive part, let's say, gets shut down.
So you're more likely to self-medicate in whatever way that might be in a later life if you're suppressing yourself.
That's a possibility.
Mm.
Unfortunately, though, what's going to happen is you're going to learn very quickly how to not feel something you don't want to feel because you're mastering the art of suppression.
Mhm.
That then becomes second nature, job done. So, in suppressing any part, any aspect of who we are, we're not allowing who we really are to come out into the world. And when we do that, it affects our potential, it affects our purpose, and it will affect our potential to be magnificent because we're not allowing ourselves to be who we are. I believe that the purpose in life is to live an authentic existence, which means be who you really are. Now, you'll get feedback as to whether or not who you really are is acceptable and works, but don't let that stop you.
Mm.
Be who you really are and find out what the consequences are. Now, the reality is that when we be who we when we be when we behave in a way that's in line with who we really are
Mm.
when we're younger, if that gets shut down, that then teaches us, okay, it's not a good idea to actually express myself, certainly around mum and dad. So then we just become very good at not expressing ourselves. Oh dear. But then what's even more sinister is, and this, it doesn't take much. We just need an unexpected, that was a stupid thing to do. Or you should be ashamed of yourself for doing that. Or big boys don't cry. Or little girls should be seen and not heard. innocent or apparently innocent statements like that projected towards a child when they're impressionable, remember, first 7 years,
Mhm.
like a sponge, if there is any sense that mum or dad are ashamed of me or angry at me or disgusted with me or whatever it might be that I've just done, if I pick that up, I'm going to take that on board that there is something wrong with me. And that's going to threaten the love, the connection, the validation that I'm desperate for you to give me as mum and dad.
Which surely has an impact in future relationships and career and who you present yourself to the world as.
That's exactly right. And also the people we attract to us.
Yeah. Because, yeah, what you put out, you're going to attract back. So if your self-worth or perception of yourself is suppressed, how can you possibly attract the right relationships, the right career, whatever that looks like for you, if the real you has been patted down at an early age?
Yeah. And the back to this energy idea,
Yeah.
energy vibrates at different frequencies, as I'm sure you know.
Hmm.
So if we are suppressed and we have an energetic vibration that's reflective of being suppressed, like attracts like,
Hmm.
I go out into the world,
Hmm.
I'm vibrating at suppressed, I will be attracted to and attract to me people and circumstances in line with that. Either people who are also suppressed or people who love suppressing others. Because I'm the finished article. Hi, my name's Richard. I'm suppressed. Emotionally, I'm constipated. I don't share much with the world. I'm highly introverted and I'm happy to be the supportive type. That will attract someone who wants that type of partner. And that's not a criticism of the other person here. It's an example of how we attract people who will, if you like, reinforce our vibration. Oh dear. However, if the vibration is, I'm at peace, I'm at ease, I like myself, I'm confident, I'm open, I'm transparent, I'm willing to be vulnerable, then we attract similar type of people and circumstances that then allows us to be that way.
Mm.
So the idea is to understand as soon as we possibly can what is good for us, hopefully to have role models who will endorse and support and encourage that, and then know that should we need advice or help, that we've got people or not circumstances, people or books or seminars that we can go to that can help us reinforce what we understand is good for us. But this is particularly difficult for so many people. This is why the personal development industry is thriving, why so many people are making so much money from various different seminars, books, retreats, whatever. It's because they offer the possibility of having what it is, what it was that we didn't get back then.
Mm.
And anything, this comes back to these unconscious needs, anything that looks like it's going to satisfy any of our unconscious needs, especially those that have been undermet for a while, we're going to graduate towards it, which explains why people behave the way they do. It's because this inherent need to satisfy these unconscious needs will move us in the direction of anything that looks like it could do that,
Mm.
which is why people will make unhealthy choices.
Mm.
It might be an unhealthy choice, the Haagen-Dazs, for example, but if it makes me feel better about myself, do you know what? I understand that it's not that healthy, but you know how it makes me feel?
Mm.
I'm going to go for how it makes me feel. Thanks very much. So then I enjoy the Haagen-Dazs. I feel good for however long I feel good. And yes, maybe after that I feel guilty. But I get over that because something distracts me and then I deal with something else. And then there's another form of self-medication. It might be alcohol, it might be work.
Could be porn, could be it could be anything. Could be social media scrolling for 4 hours.
That changes our state internally.
Mm.
It allows us to dopamine release, a bit of fun, bit of laughter, bit of interest, whatever it might be. Keep doing that or that, whichever way it is. I don't don't do it
Yeah,
that
yeah,
much.
yeah.
You can probably tell. Um, but if it gives us a break from feeling what we don't want to feel, or just allows us to feel something that we haven't felt,
Mhm.
this becomes really very important. And that explains why it's so difficult for people to give up something that they spend a lot of time doing. It's how it makes us feel.
It's no different, is it? I suppose. I mean, there'll be a lot of people listening to this who this might relate to, who are just absolutely addicted to work, and that's not a bad thing if that's your thing as such. But I still think even working too much, or in my case, in my early 20s, Richard, my coping mechanism was actually training more. It was self-sabotage. I've spoken about this before, Richard, that I think something done to excess or something where it's escapism in some way, whether you're training too much or you're having the Haagen-Dazs or having the line of cocaine or needing that next deal.
Mm,
I know some are better for you and some are not so good for you, but it's still putting at bay something, right, that you haven't solved and you haven't got control with.
exactly right. And that's the principle of addiction, a behavior that we know is unhealthy for us,
Hmm.
that we struggle to stop, even though we know intellectually it's harming us in some way, shape, or form.
And
Now,
maybe harming others as well,
say
potentially,
again.
and maybe harming others as well,
Well, that's
which is obviously a double whammy.
however we behave
Mm,
has to have a ripple effect.
mm,
There's no doubt about it. And you're right, because that then brings in the question of, well, if we don't work on our own stuff and heal our own wounds, for example, and resolve our traumas, and we take them into our next relationship,
mm.
what are the chances of that relationship working really well?
You just move the problem. You move the problem,
Yeah.
and again, I've done some work in the past. When I moved from Coventry to London with Cheryl Chapman, lovely lady. But I remember saying to her, 'cause there was some certain things going on. I knew I needed to change. I wasn't happy in Coventry, and she said to me, Kirk, I think I'd like to do a little bit of work with you. 'Cause I think there's just certain things I think they're going to show up in London, irrelevant of you thinking, right, I moved to London, my life's going to change.
Yeah.
And it was exactly right. And she went pretty deep with me, Richard.
And sometimes that's needed
Yeah.
because if this goes back as far as, let's say, 7 generations,
Mm,
that's my take on it. It can go
mhm,
back as far as
mhm,
7 generations.
mhm,
Some people think it's just three. But anyway,
mm,
if it goes back
mhm,
and you're now in your 20s, 30s, 40s,
mhm,
that's quite a long period of time that trauma, wound, conflict has been alive in you.
mm.
It's just a matter of time before it catches up. And, you know, i- if anyone is doubting whether or not they are the problem in their relationship, just ask yourself, how many relationships have you been in? Of all the failed ones that you've been in, what was the common denominator in each of the ones that failed? Common denominator in every single one of your relationships that failed. Have a guess.
Me.
Ta-da! Yeah, we are the reason things don't work, not other people.
Mm. But people blame.
Well, they do because it's easier, means we don't have to take responsibility.
Mm.
But also, I think that society doesn't help here and the media doesn't help
Why?
because they sort of suggest that it's somebody else's fault that you're not happy, or that the water bill has gone up, or that food prices are increasing, or that the government don't fill in the potholes in the road. Not your fault, type of thing.
Mm.
So I do think there's a lot of manipulation by the media to get people to feel things that we're not happy feeling, but not have to take responsibility for how we're feeling because it's the council's fault or it's my neighbor's fault or, hang on, my parents' fault. They didn't give me the love that I wanted when I was younger. Okay. So that might be true. That might be accurate. And that is regrettable. There's no doubt about that. In the here and now, bearing in mind you've decided it's mum and dad's
Mhm.
fault that you didn't get the love you needed and you're now, a wandering vagabond or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Well, you can either put energy into blaming mum and dad in this example,
Mm.
or either changing or just improving your circumstances. We have that choice. We always,
How do we change or improve our circumstances? What's an example of?
well, that would depend on the nature of the circumstances we're talking about.
Mhm.
I've talked about him. I talked a little earlier about environment.
Mhm.
There's two environments that exist. There's this one here,
The physical environment,
and then there's the one in here,
your emotion.
internal environment.
Mhm.
And a lot of people will have a nice, smart, neat, clean exterior. Everything's in its place. Everything's new. Everything's fancy. Everything works. Nice. But a lot of people will not have taken care of their internal environment, the quality of their emotions, the quality of their thoughts, physical health, nutrition, lifestyle. So, consequently, all of those things that I've just mentioned affect our capacity to function optimally. And you know this very well. So, the way to change anything, I believe, is to understand what's going on internally and to make the adjustments there, because then wherever we go, we take the adjustments with us.
Mm.
Bit like the Coventry and London thing.
Yeah.
Yes, getting out of the environment that you were in Coventry and moving to another one will absolutely have changed something about your world,
Mhm.
without stating the obvious.
Yeah.
But the Kirk who left Coventry, unless Kirk did some inner work, would be the same Kirk that arrived in London.
Mhm.
So you'll take with you the same unresolved traumas, unhealed emotional wounds.
Mm.
You will still have the same unmet unconscious needs,
Mhm.
and you will still be looking for ways in which you can feel what you want to feel
Mm.
and not feel what you don't want to feel, which was what was happening in Coventry.
Mm.
So even though the location changed, the person didn't. Now, it would have been new for a while, fresh, different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gerard Wood spoke about this a little bit last week, saying
Did
that,
he?
um, not to the depths in terms of emotion, but I love your take on this. He said that I can't remember, there was a certain phrase around it, Richard, but something. I think this is where you go, and I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I'd love your take on this. A lot of people, and I think this definitely applies to health and fitness journeys, definitely applies to people maybe starting new businesses or new ventures. They have this impulsive surge of, I'm going to start this and I'm going to go all in. I'm going to pay the money. I'm going to start the business, start the health and fitness journey. And there's this burning desire. This is it. And then they go off like a greyhound. And then the excitement, the urge dies. And then, okay, well, that didn't work. Okay, so I do something else. Why is that?
Well, I think part of it will be the newness.
And people do this in relationships as well, as in, right, the new
Mm,
excitement, and then it gets boring,
yeah.
or not boring, or it you doesn't give you that same buzz, that new variety, so to speak.
Well, they call it the honeymoon period,
Yeah,
don't they?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's the newness, it's the freshness, it's the change that comes with anything that's new, whether you move from Coventry to London or you change your partner. There's something new there.
Mm,
Now, we aren't any different unless you've done some personal inner work in between relationships. You're going to be the same guy in the next relationship that you were in the last. Okay, might be, well, it's clearly going to be someone that you're with who's different from the last person. You're no different, though. So, whatever showed up in that relationship that caused the relationship you were in to break down from your perspective, unfortunately, there's a very, very good chance that will show up there. It's just a matter of time. However, if you were to realize that the reason that wasn't working partly was because of you and you had some stuff that you need to work on, you get out of that relationship or you stay in it and you do the work. but you get out of that relationship, you do the work before you get into your next one,
Mm.
you're a different person getting into the next one, which means the next person you attract will be in line with your new vibration because you've done the work. But if you go from that relationship that didn't work into the next one and you've done no work whatsoever, the person you're going to attract over here is going to be very similar to the person you attracted over there because you haven't done any work, so you haven't changed. So then it's just a matter of time before whatever messed that one up messes this one up.
Mm.
And the chances are it won't be the other person because, with respect, they're scarred, they're wounded,
Mm.
they're bruised emotionally as well. So you must have been a good fit for each other back then because you attracted each other. Did you take the opportunity to understand what your respective wounds, scars, and bruises were, work on them together, and become complete and whole and integrated as a relationship? Well, if you had, you'd still be in it and that would work.
Mm.
But we don't because we haven't understood the importance of when we go into a relationship, we take our baggage, we take our back catalog with us.
Mm.
And guess what our new partner is destined to do every single time? Show us what's in our back catalog that we haven't dealt with. Reveal those wounds,
Mm.
not deliberately and not literally, but they will come up, they will surface.
Mm.
Because if you're unhappy and you get out of that relationship, and let's say you bring with you some residual anger, guilt, shame, let's just go anger, guilt, and shame because they're very common in relationships. You get out of that one, don't do any work in the meantime, find your next partner. Hi, my name's Kirk and I'm angry. I'm feeling guilty and ashamed. Should we get together? And if it's the right person for you for that vibration, angry, guilty, and shame, guess what? You'll get together.
Mm.
And guess what you'll be reminded of at some point in that relationship? Anger, guilt, shame. And your partner will also be reminded of whatever her unhealed wounds are as well.
Mm.
So then either you clash, which is what happens most of the time, and then you start pointing the finger of blame, or you say, aha, thank you for making me aware of my unresolved, unhealed anger, shame, and guilt in the context of this relationship. It's not you, it's me. I wonder if I can rely on your support to help me as I work through healing everything that needs healing.
Mm.
That would be great if that happened.
Mm. No, I get it. I get it.
Pretty rare, though.
No, I get this is gold. It really is. The time's flying by, so I just want to be squeeze as much out, Richard. I'm sure this will relate to people who are not clients as well. I would love your take on. We've got some clients, for example, that they'll go really, really well for a period, and then they'll have this self-destruct button, and it could be reflected in what they eat, what they drink, what they do, or maybe downloading tools of training, for example. Um, and like you've said, I've had clients who have been going well in London, then they might have gone to LA for business or just a lifestyle change or whatever. Going well for a bit, then the same pattern shows up, the same habit, the same behavior. Um, what I've took from this podcast, of course, it goes without saying that person has some emotional wounds they haven't dealt with. If they know what to do, but they choose not to do what they need to do. Um, for someone who, say, for example, couldn't get one-on-one work with yourself or someone in similar field, what would be the first thing, or maybe an example question, or what could they do in that moment if they just know, right, they've got a pattern that keeps showing up every few months or every few years or even every few weeks? What would be your first piece of advice or question that person should ask themselves if they've got a pattern that keeps showing up that deep down they think, oh God, why do I fucking keep doing that? It could be a certain same time, same day, or same behavior that people keep self-sabotaging over the same thing. Is there any advice or question that you would ask in that moment?
Well, identify what the pattern is for starters. Yeah, that'd
Okay,
be
so say for an example, I think one of the most common things I think that holds a lot of people back with health and fitness, for example, Richard, is the craving for sugar. The amount of people, honestly, if I had probably a pound when someone says, I'm really, really good, but I've just got a sweet tooth, right? It's just food.
yeah.
I've said, it's not just food. There's an emotional trigger behind that of some sort because it's not the food. Clearly, you made a decision, as you've shared today, that is going to make me feel a certain way by eating that food. We've used Haagen-Dazs as an example. Um, I think it's a huge global issue that, like sugar, as an example, someone's struggling with sugar,
Mm.
right? And I'm not trying to say to anyone listening to this, never eat refined sugar. I eat it, bloody, I like a drink or 10 from time to time, right? But if someone is continually self sabotaging consistently with sugar, because I genuinely think is the refined sugar as in its form on its own is, and processed food, but more so sugar, I think is one of the most addictive and easily accessible things on the planet
Agreed.
more than ever, certainly than 30, 40 years ago. How do you combat that if people know that that is the thing holding them back, for example, with managing their health?
So there's a couple of things I'd say, and let's start with the comfort element.
Yep.
So most people who have a sweet tooth
Mhm.
are comforted by the sugar. It's how it makes them feel internally. You know how that works chemically. So consequently, the sugar is a substitute for something. Well, not only a substitute, but it's a quick answer for something. So my first question, uh, the first invitation I would give to people would be to ask, okay, so when you consume the sugar, how does it make you feel? So that we establish whatever it is that comes with the sugar.
Mhm.
So we then have a list of feelings that come with the sugar. Now, the reason someone would have great difficulty giving up the sugar is because of what they get as a result of consuming it. However, if we can find other ways of making those feelings occur more naturally and in a more healthy way, then that casts doubt on the need for the sugar. But it requires understanding, what does the sugar make you feel that you're really happy to feel that actually only the sugar seems to do. That would be the starting point, because until we know what the feelings are that the sugar brings, we then don't know which way to go. But what we can be sure of is that the feelings that you're after here, thanks to the sugar, will be linked to your unconscious needs.
Mhm.
Now, I don't believe it's reasonable for people to expect a very quick, simple answer to such a big issue.
Mhm.
So, someone needs to be willing to invest either money or time or energy or all three in going down this road of really getting underneath the skin of what's the truth of what's going on here. What does the sugar do for me? Because here's what we can say with certainty, whether it's sugar or anything else that we're addicted
Yeah,
to.
booze or social media scrolling in that moment, it's the same thing. Or needing to go for a fucking 10-mile run
Yep,
when that urge and that that need to feel that way.
that's it.
Yeah.
What are the feelings that you're chasing? And you'll be feeling those, you'll be chasing those feelings because they're absent. So then we look for other ways that you can feel these things
Mm.
that don't involve chasing something that's unhealthy.
Which comes back to your point, Richard, where you're saying, like, rewind back to the age of 0 to 7, where if you've been suppressed in some way and you've not give yourself permission to be your true authentic self, which affects how you feel
About yourself.
about yourself, that's going to influence what you do, then you're going to repeat that behavior over and over again.
Unless
Mm,
something changes.
mm, mm, mm.
So just to finish off this bit here,
Mm.
so we've identified what the feelings are that this brings.
Mhm.
So we realize, okay, you want more of this, right? But you're using this to get it. How else could we get you to feel these things? The reason you're struggling to feel these things is because they are hidden behind your unhealed emotional wounds and your unresolved traumas. The emotional impact of wounds, bruises, scars, and traumas buries feelings that we know we can have access to, that we've had access before. We can't get to them as long as we've got unhealed emotional wounds, scars, and bruises sitting on top of them. So let's just go for Haagen-Dazs,
Mm.
because then up we come, down they go. I can feel what I want thanks to the Haagen-Dazs. No Haagen-Dazs, what I want to feel goes back under the rug of anger, sadness, fear, guilt, hurt, shame, disgust.
Mm.
So it comes back to what I've mentioned on a couple of occasions, the importance of understanding our emotional wounds, scars, and bruises, and finding the most appropriate way to heal those wounds, scars, and bruises removes them from the equation, which then makes it easier for you to start to feel the things that you wanted to feel that you're using the Haagen-Dazs to feel because you need a break from everything else that you don't want to feel.
Mm.
So for me, to acquire something that we want
Mhm.
doesn't mean we go after that thing. For me, it means going after and resolving the thing that's stopping you from having it in the first place.
So
Because something is stopping you from feeling whatever you want to feel.
Mm.
Let's find out what that is. Let's resolve that. Let's take that out of the equation. It's going to be impossible for you not to feel what you want to feel, but because we've taken away the thing that was stopping you from feeling. Because a lot of people will go in search of peace and tranquility and ease and motivation and self worth. People will go after that and make that the objective, understandably, because you've identified what it is that you want. The reason you're struggling to get it in the first place is because it's buried under a pile of unprocessed, unintegrated emotional scars, wounds, and bruises from the past. So even if you go after all of those things that you say you would like and you achieve them, what have you done about the wounds, scars, and bruises? Well, you haven't attended to those. So guess what? They stay.
how much have you seen? Because I know you've worked with some top elite level athletes. You've worked with some obviously very high flyers in business. Uh, have you? How, say how often? That's a bad question. Have you ever come across a case where someone has achieved amazing things as an athlete, for example, achieved amazing things as a business? They've achieved that pinnacle, but it still didn't fulfill them.
All the time.
Mm.
It's actually a characteristic of high achievers. One of the reasons they become high achievers is because something that mattered most or that really mattered to them when they were younger was missing,
Mm.
without exception.
Mm.
Without exception. Something was missing when they were younger that provided them, and here's the irony, if you like, what was missing when they were younger provided them with the fuel to go out and get and achieve.
So that's a positive there, right?
Well, it depends upon what the consequences are along the way.
Okay.
So, could be,
Mm.
would you, if you were given the choice, okay, you can do this one of two ways, Kirk. You can either miss out when you're younger, and that can be your leverage, or you can have what you need when you're younger, and then let's see where you go. Which would you choose?
You don't want to miss life, do you, in pursuit of this pinnacle? If you can have both.
Well, whatever you choose,
Mm.
it wouldn't be a problem. What I would suggest, though, is if we were given that choice, and we're not, by the way,
Yeah.
let's make no bones about it, we're not given this choice.
No.
But if we're given the choice or the possibility of a stable upbringing, bearing in mind how influential the first 7 years is,
Mm-hmm.
take the stable upbringing. Spend time around role models. Be in an environment that supports you, that meets your needs in healthy ways, because there's the platform for your self worth, your self image, your self concept, your self identity.
Mhm.
And if you're around the right people, guess what happens? Your vibration means you attract the right people.
Mm. Which brings me on to a question, Rich. I'd love to ask you. And in your opinion, how do or how much do people's personal relationships impact on their emotional well-being?
Well, people's personal relationships are reflective of their emotional well being. So, the amount of fulfillment you get from a personal relationship, the reward, what it does for you, who it allows you to become and be, will all affect your emotional well being. But let's go back to the moment before you hooked up with your partner. The quality of your emotional well being then will have attracted you to the person you hook up with. They will have been attracted to you because of your vibration, which will include your emotional well being. It goes a lot beyond physique and money, ultimately,
Mm.
depending on why
But
someone's gone into a relationship.
does this tie in what you said earlier about you're either going to attract someone virtually identical or someone who sees maybe a vulnerability or someone who, like you said earlier about how can I word this properly? You said, for example, if someone has a certain level of self-worth and value on their emotions, it might be rock bottom or relatively low. And then you've got someone who loves feeling like they've got controlled and likes being a carer maybe of some sort. Is that where you're going with this?
And that does work a lot of the
Yeah,
time. You're
yeah.
right.
Mm,
Let me use a very common example, if I
mm,
may.
mhm,
If someone is used to playing the victim in their life,
mm,
then they are going to attract into their lives someone who's looking for a victim to play the assertive, dominant role.
mm,
So that allows the victim to carry on being the victim in this relationship, and it allows the dominant person in this relationship to carry on being the dominant person. Now, it's not really, it's certainly not healthy. It is sustainable because if you've made peace with being the victim, and if your partner's made peace with being the one who's in charge,
mm,
well, hang on, that's a good fit. Not ideal. That's not the point here,
mm,
because the majority of relationships have happened and because of this type of thing. Two introverts together will be very happy. But what an introvert lacks that an extrovert can bring, actually, that's a good combination.
mm,
So it really depends on, and we'll make this about you just for a moment.
mhm,
Whatever you're missing in your life
mhm,
at the time you're single and looking for a partner, whatever you're missing at that time, you will be attracted and move towards partners who, certainly on the surface, look like they might be able to um, satisfy that, but unconsciously, you'll get a sense. And it comes back to these unconscious needs again.
mm,
So, the smart thing for us to do is, first of all, understand what the needs are, find healthy ways of meeting those needs for ourselves,
mhm.
which means we will never need anybody else in our lives to ensure those needs are met.
How do you know how do you know if you're meeting your needs in empowering ways, and how do you know what are the signs, and how do you know that you meet your needs in disempowering ways, whether it's in business, in relationship, like, or just in life? How do you know, or is it emotions that your feedback tool?
Um, Emotions are a feedback tool. First of all, you've got to understand what the needs are
Mhm,
and understand how they manifest themselves in your life.
Hmm.
So, for example, one of our unconscious needs is for intimacy.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, if you're in a personal relationship with somebody else, your access to intimacy and the chances of there being intimacy are far higher. Yes. And if you both enjoy intimacy, great. But you could be in a relationship with someone and they're not really into the intimate thing. They like being in the relationship
Hmm.
because they feel safe and they have predictability, they have certainty, but they're not into the intimacy side of things. So you're going to be in a relationship, but your need for intimacy is going to go unmet.
So then what happens?
Well, that depends on the two individuals, because if the two individuals in question know about these things and are mature enough and can have an adult conversation about it, then you speak your truth to each other. And if you do that, you find out intimacy is important to you, touch, whatever it might be, everything that goes with intimacy. And you find out from your partner, no, don't like that. Now, there'll be a reason your partner doesn't like that. And it probably goes back to something that happened in the past that put them off intimacy. So there's an opportunity then for your partner to heal whatever it was that happened from the past that's getting in the way of them being intimate in this relationship. Or if your partner doesn't want to heal whatever it was that caused the intimacy thing, then you've got a decision to make between you, because if you stay in that relationship, you're going to be staying, assuming you've had the conversation, right? You're going to be staying in that relationship, understanding that intimacy with that particular partner not available. So then it's on you to decide whether or not you're okay with that. Now, what are your choices? Well, you could say, well, do you know what? I'll stay because everything else is good, or whatever it might be, and I'll go and get my intimacy elsewhere. Now, that would be a healthy way of getting your intimacy, but it would be unhealthy for the relationship. That's an option. Another option is for you to say, okay, well, if there's no chance of this changing, because intimacy is high on my list and it's not on yours, I think that this relationship might not be as fulfilling for me as I would want it to be,
Mm.
simply because of my high need for intimacy and the prospect of it not coming. So, and then you have the conversation according to both of you, because who knows? It may well be that presented with this scenario, your partner might think, "Mm, I don't want to take the risk of splitting up. I don't want to be on my own." Because let's remember, the reason we get into relationships is to meet a number of these needs, not just one.
Mm.
So when we get out of a relationship, what we give up is a number of these needs being met.
Mm.
That's why so many people will stay in a relationship, even though they know they shouldn't. It's because by getting out, all of a sudden, a number of these needs are unmet.
Mm.
But by being in a relationship, those needs will be met.
But not necessarily as empowering as what they could do in the right relationship. But because it's a need, they're going to, it's a need.
It's a driver,
Yeah.
unconscious driver that makes no sense at all when you put it up against, yeah, but that's wrong. That's morally wrong. That's unlawful. Yeah, I understand that. But when a need is deep enough and strong enough,
Mm.
it will make us do things that even we know we shouldn't be doing.
Mm.
And that's why a lot of people who are in relationships will find another one before they move,
Okay.
because then they don't have to go any period of time without having those needs unmet.
They want the certainty of knowing they've got the
Yeah.
next option to meet those needs rather than the void of shit. What's going to happen
Yeah.
now?
And the discomfort and the uncertainty and the fear.
Mm.
Well, what will happen if I'm on my own? I've been
No
in
choice.
relationships for all of my life.
Yeah.
On my own, what will happen? Don't know. Do you want to find out? Well, not really, unless I have to.
Mm.
Well, entirely up to you. Because where I was going with this was, you present the scenario to your current partner, and they say, "Okay, I'll try to be more intimate." So great, if that works. So there are always a number of options available to us
Mm.
when we find ourselves in a situation that isn't ideal for us.
Mm.
And this comes back to the very first point we talked about an honest relationship with our emotions. If we can have an honest relationship with the people in our lives about how we are feeling, there's no chance of them misunderstanding where we're coming from, how we're feeling.
So it's the message to every single person listening to this, that the importance of sharing your emotions
Yeah,
with
massively,
everyone in your life is crucial.
massively. And let's accept and let's understand there's a lot of fear around doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Big boys don't cry, little girls should be seen and not heard. Those were messages that were imprinted upon us when we're very, very young. And look at society today. How open are people about talking about their emotions?
Mm.
It's an improvement, but there's a long way to go. Number one reason why people don't talk about their emotions? They're afraid of what will happen if they do. Will you judge me? Will you think I'm weak? Will you reject me? Will you leave me? Will you call me stupid? Will you go to somebody else and say, hey, did you know that Richard fella, he's a real sad so and so? Fear, 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 fear of what might happen if I share my emotions with you. So, what's the best thing to do? Don't share them. I'll keep them to myself, thanks very much. But where do I keep them? I internalize them, I bury them alive. They affect my chemical makeup. They're all hormonal.
Which it can create illnesses, can create
Drop the
injuries.
can.
It
It does.
it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Rich, I'm conscious of time and stuff, but this is Parker. I'll have to get you on again. You're unbelievable. How share with the listeners what you do coaching wise, and what you believe makes you different, your method of coaching, as concisely as you can, because I know you probably do an episode on this, but um,
Okay.
share with the listeners what you do.
Um, so I started off as a life coach back in the day,
Hmm.
performance coach, and realized that a lot of my clients were getting good results, but not the best results. And I wondered why. Courtesy of my dad's cancer diagnosis, and I got into health and healing and realized the importance of our emotional makeup and stress. So I decided, okay, coaching by itself isn't enough because coaching tends to be future focused. The reason people don't create the futures they want is because of what's happened in the past that they haven't got over, the baggage, if you like, for want of a technical term. So I decided to become a therapist. And I studied a large number of healing modalities, put them all together, chose the best bits. So now what I do when I help individuals, it's a combination of therapy and coaching that allows someone to make sure that their past is lighter and their future more compelling, but thanks to lightening that past. Because it's hard to achieve everything it's possible to achieve when we're carrying with us baggage from the past. So it's a pretty unusual combination because people tend to be either one or the other. And contrary to popular belief, therapy does not require digging up the past. It does not require having a rebirthing experience or having a chat with your parents or going back to your first school and having a word with the headmaster. It doesn't require that. I've created something that I call no story therapy, which means you're not allowed to tell your story. Because you see, the story is never going to change because it's his story, right? It's never going to change. So, what's the value in talking about the story? Well, for some people, it's good for them to get it off their chest. So, it can be therapeutic for some people. But to pay money to tell someone what's happened, I don't think it's the best use of time or money because it's predictable what has happened in the past. So, very, very quickly, when I work with someone, I find out whatever it is that they're currently carrying of a wounded, bruised, scarred, traumatized nature based upon anything I pluck from their current life, resolve those wounds, heal those wounds, which dramatically changes somebody anyway, which should be done before you then think about the future. Because if you think about the future while you're wounded, that future is going to be influenced by the wounds. If you're no longer wounded, that future looks different. The possibilities for you feel different because you're not carrying with you the burden of whatever it was you picked up along the way for the first however many years, whatever happened during the imprint period, and whatever you inherited from up to 7 generations previously. But it doesn't require, as I say, going into and revisiting the pain. There's nothing to be achieved by that.
Changes your relationship with the pain.
Well, absolutely.
Because I mean, sorry, Richard, I'd love to get your take before we sort of wrap up here. Negative emotions, like, well, I mean, even me just saying that negative emotions, right, is just a word I've used habitually that are not as positive. For example, like every single person, I'm sure you, even on a weekly basis, feels things that don't feel too good from time to time,
Yep.
right? And I've said this to clients sometimes, we're a bit feeling like on the crest of a wave and then something shitty happens. How much of that do we just need to accept that they're just part of life? Because I think some of the flaws I see in the personal development industry sometimes is this deluded place that everything has to be positive and uplifting. And like you say, let's just think positive and all this stuff. Like without these little dips in shit, as I say it sometimes, you wouldn't appreciate the other side. Say you've worked with a client and you've healed these emotions. How do we then deal with just day to day things that crop up, or does this training that you're speaking about of dealing with the deeper stuff, does that help us not make these negative emotions that crop up a bigger deal than what they need to be, or move on from that quicker? The lag time, as I call it.
Yeah, well, the best way to create the shortest amount of lag time
Yeah,
between feeling something you don't want to feel and not feeling it
yeah.
again is feel it fully.
Okay.
Feel it fully. As soon as you feel it fully. Feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it, and it'll pass. Because remember, it's energy that's in motion. And as long as we feel it, guess what? It goes. But we create problems by saying to ourselves, I'm feeling something I don't want to feel. I'm going to put a lid on it. I'm going to put it in the black bag over there, and I'm going to put it in the cupboard under the stairs so that I don't have to deal with it. That's the relationship between our emotions that's adversarial. I
So
talked
you're
about,
saying embrace it.
oh, we must.
No, but people don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the big bridge that we've got, or
Or they
that's the
don't
gap we've
think
got to
that
bridge.
they should ever have these emotions.
Well, with the greatest of respect, that is flawed. Absolutely. Doesn't work as a belief. We are designed to have emotions. They give us feedback. They tell us how someone or something is affecting us. They're bloody useful.
Mm,
So they're an opportunity for us to increase our awareness and appreciation of how much something affects us.
mm,
And what we then should do, absolutely, every time, is sit with that emotion, feel that emotion until it's gone. Now, I would hasten to add, sometimes if the emotion is really strong because it's from the past, it's not practical for you to sit with it whilst it cascades down the mountain until you're free of it. Not practical, not appropriate. In which case, what we've got to do is we need to make a pact with ourselves that when we get the opportunity to fully feel the emotion that we didn't feel today because we were in a meeting or whatever it was, that we will do that. Now, that's on us.
mm,
And it's back to what I said at the beginning about the relationship that we have with our emotions. I'm of the opinion there's no such thing as a negative emotion, and we don't need to categorize
mm,
between positive and negative. I know we do, because in life we look for dualistic meanings. It's either this or it's that.
mhm.
I've got certainty because if it's not this, it's that. Okay, I'm happy. No, no. Let's just take our emotions as something that is a very natural, innate part of who we are. Let's honor them, let's respect them, let's value them, let's work with them, let's see what we can learn from them, and then let's develop an amicable relationship with them. Because I promise you that if you or me or anybody else starts to demonstrate that we have no issue talking about how we're feeling, and we encourage other people to do the same, and we don't act in any strange way when somebody does, we support them as if it's the most normal thing. I think more and more people will become okay about talking about their emotions. Because what is the biggest thing that's going on at the moment, especially when it comes to men's health and suicide? Men don't talk about their emotions. As a sweeping statement, that's right. Why? we're afraid of the consequences of what will happen if we do. And the fear is much stronger than the benefit.
Mm.
So when we get over the fear, and that's possible as well, by the way, to get over the fear, that's another podcast, I'm sure. Once we have no fear of expressing ourselves, it's easier to express ourselves, which means we don't add any more to the back catalog. And if we make a commitment to clearing up the back catalog, because we've all got one, then moving forward, our relationship with our emotions in the future, regardless of what type of emotion it is, easy, not a problem, love it. The stuff that's in the back catalog, well, we can just chip away at that, whether we're going to a seminar or a book, or whether we engage a coach or whoever it might be, chip away at that. That, as that diminishes, we become more of who we can be. We become more of an authentic individual, which I believe, like I said, is the purpose of our existence.
Mm.
The more authentic we are, the greater impact we can have on the world, because we're showing it's safe, it's good, it's healthy, and it's possible
Mm.
to be who we really are. And when we lose the fear, we transform our own lives, because we're then operating at a frequency that is courageous. It's not about not having any fear, because fear is useful, yes, in the right circumstances. But at the moment, too many of us are crippled, disabled, suppressed by fear. And whether you work on anger or sadness or fear or guilt or hurt or shame with someone who's an effective therapist in working on those emotions,
Mhm.
it has to change who you are. It does change who you are physiologically, changes your vibration, which means when you go out into the world,
Mm.
you attract different people and different circumstances.
Mhm.
That's
Brilliant.
why inner work is so important, in my opinion.
No, so this is brilliant, Rich. I could probably keep you for hours and hours and hours. Couple of things to wrap this up. Um, where can people find you, reach out to you? That's one. And just lastly, other than reach out to you, what is a great action step for someone to make that first step on exploring an improvement in their emotional well-being?
Okay. First step. All right. Okay. So, first step and how they can reach out to me. We'll put that together, shall we?
Yeah.
It just came to me. I hadn't planned that at all. So, every now and then, I issue what I call a lesson in emotional well being.
Mhm,
Free service on my website, bit like a newsletter.
mhm,
Don't bombard your inbox with it. Um, so, anybody who goes to richardmoat.com,
mhm,
sign up to my lessons in emotional well being, and you'll hear from me on a regular basis my thoughts, my insights into what you can do. It's very practical advice,
mhm,
what you can do to help yourself become more emotionally articulate,
mhm,
more emotionally mature, and develop greater agency over
mm,
your emotional well being.
mm.
That's how I'd answer both of those questions.
Great. Awesome. Rich, thank you so much for your
It's
time.
been a pleasure.
Predictably,
Really.
the minutes flew by, as we said. We get told off again by the podcast studio. But
Bless you for having me. Thank you.
no, Richard, thank you so much. And I look forward to definitely getting you on here again. Thank you so much, guys. And I'll see you next time.